Okay, today we'll be starting in 1 Kings chapter 7. If you're using one of these, it's going to be page 286. Give us all some time to turn to that page, and then I'll begin us in a word of prayer. I'm going to be on page 286. If you'll bow your heads and pray with me. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity you have given us to study your word. We ask that what we say today, what we do today, and what we think right now are all done in ways that glorify you. We ask this all in your name. Amen. We're still with Solomon. I'm hoping today we will finish Solomon finally. He's in the first 11 chapters of 1 Kings. Okay, it is weird hearing myself loud. I'm sorry. It's going to take me a minute to get used to it. Let's see. So some recap of what we've done so far. We had Solomon becoming king, and then we had him build the temple. The next part we are going to have is going to be Solomon's building, hopefully finished. He's going to build his palace, and then he's going to build the temple some more. Then after that, we get into Solomon expanding the economic power of Israel, and then we finish off with his decline, which has already been foreshadowed, and it's already foreshadowing how everyone else after Solomon will be a horrible king in comparison to all that Solomon was. Can I get someone to read verses 1 through 12? Thank you. Put in perspective, the temple is huge, it's magnificent, it's beautiful. And Solomon's house is also big and magnificent and beautiful. Using the same builders and same materials as the temple without all the gold, you have Solomon build his palace, which has, I think it was 4 massive halls, which is very reminiscent of the building style at the time, which was, if you have a big building, it's going to be long. It's important to note that there is a break right here that I have a strong feeling that the temple just took forever to get all the materials, which is why it mentioned Solomon's palace being built here. Could also be that this is just a narrative thing going, hey, we built a building, let's talk about the other building he built. So there's two trains of thought you can have when coming to this. Instead of reading the rest of chapter 7, which is really, really, really long and boring, I'm just going to tell it to you quick, dirty style. In front of the temple, there are 2 pillars that are cast in bronze. There's going to be a guy named Hiram, who is not King Hiram, but someone from Tyre as well, named Hiram as well, who comes to Jerusalem and is like a masterclass bronze worker. So the pillars on the outside are going to be made of bronze, and I think it said it's like 2 hands width thick. So these are sturdy pillars. The pillars kind of look like palm trees with all the fronds cut off. There's just so many pomegranates on it that it just looks immaculate. Go figure, it's the temple. From there will be 5 carts built that are basically just giant water tanks that are enormous. There's 10. They are 6 feet by 6 feet by 4 feet. And I think they could hold like 10,000 baths. Or that was the other giant basin that he made that had 3 cows, 3 cows, 3 cows, 3 cows pointing in the cardinal directions. That was massive and also made of bronze. That was the one. That held 12,000 gallons of water. Next, there are also all the basic furnishings that you would need in a temple. There's pots and shovels and basins and everything. And then there is also 10 menorahs in the temple that are, if I remember right, I'd have to read it so I don't, oh, there we go. They're made of gold. So everything that went into the temple was made of gold. Everything that was on the outside was made of bronze. I summarized for you a really long, boring chapter. The next chapter is going to be chapter 8, and there is a lot that goes on here. I will read the first part, which is going to be the ark being brought into the temple. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes and the leaders of the fathers' houses of the people of Israel before King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which was Zion. And all the men of Israel assembled to King David at the feast in the mount, I'm not going to pronounce that, which was in the 7th month. And all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark. And they brought the ark of the Lord and the tent of the meeting and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. The priests and the Levites did. And then Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who had assembled before him were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen they couldn't be counted or numbered. Then the priest brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, which was the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim, which overshadowed the ark and its poles. And the poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary, but they couldn't be seen from outside. Because if you remember, there was like a double chamber system for the main temple. So you had the inner, which was inside the inner sanctuary, which was then also having a bunch of rooms around it. But there was doors that you could go into the inner sanctuary. I passed that part. What verse did I end on? I'm skipping to 9. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets that Moses had put there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the people of Israel, and when they came out of Egypt. And when the priests came out of the most holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. This is very reminiscent of what we see happening with the tabernacle, especially in Exodus, where God comes down as a cloud and is over the tabernacle. Something that I realized I didn't do last week was talk to you about cherubim, which feels insane. They're not the little babies with wings that we think of. That was a Renaissance thing. Up to this point, we don't know what a cherubim looks like. We have to wait all the way till Ezekiel 1 to have what a cherubim looks like, which is very different than what we think of. Ezekiel 1 describes it as their faces look like this. Each with 4 had the face of a human being. On the right had the face of a lion. On the left, an ox. and also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. They had 2 wings spreading upward, each wing touching each wing touching that of the creature on the other side, and each wing on the other covering. So it was 2 up, 2 down, and 2 out. If you look at the handout that I gave you, or if you remember what it looked like, the cherubim there look more like sphinxes. And this is one train of thought that was had, because we don't have a proper description of them till Ezekiel, that the idea of the cherubim was just a sphinx, which changes depending on which culture you are, but considering that the Greeks and the Egyptians were some of the older cultures that had this signified, most archaeologists will say that they were more sphinx-like than they were how it's described in Ezekiel. I think that's all the notes that I have for this. Next will be Solomon blesses the Lord. What happens after this all the way until Solomon's benediction, which is verse 54, it starts becoming just a repetition of everything that was said in Deuteronomy, which was a 40-day sermon that Moses did right before the Israelites went into the Promised Land. It's basically a bunch of recounting what you need to do, what you should be doing. This is how you're going to be a good Jew. And I'm not going to even bother with a prayer of dedication, because it's literally just a sermon on here's what you need to do. Something interesting to note is that God waits 480 years to not only have a place that is his, but also to put himself. Before this point, they had the tabernacle, which was a temporary buildup. It had a bunch of slotted wood and silver basins that the wood would go into, and then there'd be poles and a bunch of cloth that went over. But the idea of that was you could always take it apart, move it, reset it up. Whereas now, 480 years after the Israelites leave Egypt, God goes, this is my dwelling place. This is the permanent building I am claiming, which is a huge mentality mindset change that's than what's happened for the past almost 500 years. Solomon's dedication at verse 54 is a reminder to focus on God. I'm going to read it real quick for you all. Now, as Solomon finished offering all this prayer and pleas to the Lord, he arose from before the altar of the Lord, where he had knelt on hands outstretched toward heaven. So, like this. And he stood and blessed all the assembly of Israel with a loud voice, saying, Blessed be the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, according to all that he promised. Now 1 word has failed all his good promise, which he has spoken by Moses his servant. The Lord our God be with us, as he was with our fathers. May he not leave us or forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to him, to walk in all his ways and keep his commands, his statutes, his rules, which he commanded our father. This feels very reminiscent of a prayer I prayed earlier today. Sorry. Let those words of mine, with which I have pleaded before the Lord, be near the Lord our God day and night, and he may maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, as each day requires, that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord is God. There is no other. Let your heart, therefore, be wholly true to the Lord our God, walking in his statutes and keeping his commands, as that to this day. Everything that Moses told us, let us keep living. It's a very generic prayer, but it can be a good one if it didn't have all the prayers and the commands and the rules and the laws. If you remove that, this is honestly a very solid prayer. It's more or less what I pray every day, just a lot fancier. The next part is going to be Solomon's sacrifices. I can sum it up for you real quick. He sacrificed a lot. It was a whole ton. And sacrifices weren't you burn up everything. You would burn up part of it, which meant that, hey, now that we have all this great barbecue, let's eat it. So that's exactly what they do. For 7 days. They go from Sunday to Sunday. And then I like the last part. Solomon just goes, okay, leave now. And that is all of chapter 8. Chapter 9 is going to be God appearing to Solomon, and then Solomon doing a bunch of other stuff. This is before he becomes the traitor, and before we see his downfall. So just to have that in your mind. Starting chapter 9, verse 1. As soon as Solomon finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all that Solomon desired to build, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him Gibeon. That was when God had gone to him and gone, what do you want? I want wisdom. Because you asked for wisdom, I'll give you a bunch of everything else. And he said, I heard your prayer and your plea, which you have made before me. And I have consecrated this house that you've built, putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time. And as for you, if you will walk before me as your father David did, with integrity of heart and uprightness, and doing according to all that I have commanded you, and keeping all my rules and statutes, then I will establish your throne over Israel forever. As I promised David, saying, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. But if you turn aside from following me, you or your children, and don't keep my commands or statutes, that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and worship them, I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them. And the house that I have consecrated for my name, I will cast out of my sight. And Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples. And this house will become a heap of ruins. Again, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Kind of sounds like what happens with the Babylonians. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done this to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold on their gods, and worshipped them and served them. Therefore the God has brought all this disaster on them. Very nice prophetic warning. Hey, don't stop following me. If you do, everything bad's going to happen. I will leave the land, and the land will be as though it's covered in salt. Again, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like we don't see that happen in 2 chapters, like we don't see that happen in about 500 years. I got to make sure I don't have any other fun notes. Yeah, everything I said. Okay, going to verse 10. At the end of the 20 years, because that's how long it took to build everything, the Pharaoh's daughter's house, his palace, and the temple, and build the house of the Lord, and Hiram the king had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress and gold, as much as he desired. Solomon had given Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee, which is really funny. I'll tell you what happens next. They're worthless. It's like giving him ghost towns that have been soaked up of all of their resources. Solomon, here, take these 20 lands near you. And Hiram goes, awesome, land. This is literally nothing. What the hell, man? And then he gives him 120 talents, which I do have is a ton of money if we were to do it in today's. Yeah, 1 talent of gold is worth $3.6 million. So these are solid bricks of gold that he gives him, and he gives 120 of them. Now, granted, I think out of everything that Solomon had done and produced, that was like giving him chump change, because Solomon has a ton of wealth. I'm just going to make sure I'm not spoiling anything, and I'll tell you anyways. Solomon reinstitutes slavery. There are people who the Israelites were supposed to have killed and supposed to have kicked out of the promised land, and instead of following the commands that his forefathers had been given by God, he makes them slaves, which is one of the many things that causes his downfall. I don't think that's at this point. I think that, I hope we hear about that in 11. Oh, another thing. When it talks about 1 talent of silver, that's equivalent to about $1,900 today. So again, not chump change. These are like bricks of silver that he hands out. Just to in your minds of how much money he's casually giving away. Going to verse 15. And this is the account of the forced labor that Solomon drafted to build the house of the Lord and his house, and the Millo and the wall of Jerusalem and Hazar and yada, yada, yada. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer and burnt it with fire and had killed all the Canaanites who lived in the city and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon rebuilt Gezer and lower Beth Horon and Baalth and Tamar in the wilderness and the land of Judah, and all the store cities that Solomon had, and all the cities for his chariots, and the cities for his horsemen, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. So he did forced labor and made them the builders of everything. All the people who were left, which were the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not the people of Israel, their descendants who were left in the land, who the people of Israel were unable to devote to destruction, these were the people that Solomon drafted to be slaves, so they are to this day. I don't know how long that is, but there's many theories about when Chronicles and Kings were written. This is either right before the exile happens, during the exile, or after the exile. So no matter how you look at it, these people are slaves for a long amount of time, for many generations. But the people of Israel, Solomon made no slaves. They were soldiers, they were his officials, his commanders, his captains, his chariot commanders, and his horsemen. These were the chief officers who were over Solomon's work, 550 who had the charge of the people who carried on the work. But Pharaoh's daughter went up from the city of David to her own house that Solomon had built for her. Then he built the Millo. 3 times a year Solomon used to offer up burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar that he had built to the Lord, making offerings with it before the Lord. So he finished the house. Solomon built up a fleet of ships. This starts going into Solomon the trader. He built up a fleet of ships at Ezineer-Geber, which is near Eloth on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. And Huron sent with the fleet his servants, seamen who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon. Basically, a bunch of traders to make sure that your unlegged seamen get their sea legs. And then they went to Ophir and brought from there gold, 420 talents of gold. Like, that's a lot of money. We're talking billions, if not close to trillions. And they brought it to King Solomon. At this point, we are going to be getting into Solomon being the trader, which is how we get Queen Sheba and Solomon's wealth just amassing like crazy. Some interesting things to note is we don't know where Ophir is. We don't even know what Ophir is. Later we will find, because Queen Sheba asked for it, Solomon makes instruments from the wood from Ophir. It's algwood. No idea what that is. There's a thought that all this is coming from India, so it's a bunch of sandalwood that he got. We have no idea. Ophir doesn't exist. So we're kind of just left up to speculation. Until reading this now, I thought it was somewhere in Europe, and now reading that it came from the Red Sea. Okay, cool. It could be Madagascar for all we know. We just know that it's not anywhere close to them, so they traveled for a distance, and they did that like 3 times a year, if I remember right. Something to note is that Sheba is Yemen. So it's just a bit down the Red Sea at the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula. That's where Sheba is, which means she crossed a huge desert or a lot of open sea to go to Solomon. Chapter 10, starting at verse 1. Now when the queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She went to Jerusalem with a very great routine, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. And Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, and the house that he had built, and the food on his table, and the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his cupbearers, his burnt offering, and all that he offered to the Lord, there was no breath left in her. She was utterly in awe of all that Solomon had. And she said to the king, "The report was true that I heard in my own land of your word and your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I had come and seen it with my own eye. And behold, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpassed the report that I heard. Happy are your men, happy are your servants, who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom." I would love to just be at Solomon's feet, just hearing all the wisdom. I feel like it's just Wikipedia being written off the whole time, just a bunch of knowledge. Because we find out later that he talks about everything and anything. The stars, snakes, birds, anything and everything Solomon knows and he talks about. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and sat on your throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he has made you king, that you may execute justice and righteousness. Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, and a very great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again came such an abundance of spices as those of the queen of Sheba had given to King Solomon. Again, adding on to Solomon's wealth was unmatched by anyone prior to him and anyone after him. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, also brought amalgam wood. Again, don't know what that is. And precious stones. And the king made amalgam wood supports for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, also lyres and harps for singers. No such amalgam wood has come or been seen to this day. Again, we don't know what it is. For all we know, they could have taken all the trees that were amalgam wood and never planted another one. We just have no idea. And the king Solomon gave the queen all that she desired, whatever she asked besides what was given to her by the bounty of King Solomon. So he turned and went back to her land with her servants. Hi, Harry. You're out a little early. Okay, moving on to chapter 10, verse 14. This is Solomon's great wealth. Let me just make sure I don't have anything fun else to say. Oh, yeah. This basically just shows the peak of everything of Solomon's reign. His 11 chapters are not written chronologically, if it hasn't been noticed by now. The first 2 chapters are very chronological, but like the next 3 chapters, if I remember right, are kind of just, hey, here's some important things to know about what happened during his king time. The most chronological we get is after the 20 years. Here's other things that Solomon did, and then his downfall, which is at the end. But everything else, we kind of don't know when this happens, how this happens. Solomon could have been making these trades while the temple was being built. What we do know is that the fleet was built after, but that's all we know. Chapter 10, verse 14. Now the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Remember, that's a lot of gold. We're into the billions by this point. Besides that which had come from the explorers and from the business of the merchants and from all the kings of the west and from the governors of the land. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas, which is about 1.25 pounds of gold, went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps, and at the back of the throne was a calf's head, and on each side of the seat were armrests and 2 lions sitting beside the armrests, while 12 lions stood there, 1 on each step of the 6 steps. The like of it was never made in any kingdom. Again, proving Solomon had the peak of everything. All Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. None were of silver, as silver was considered nothing in the days of Solomon. Yeah, when he's getting 666 talents a year, gold is the standard. Silver is meaningless at this point. Oh, where did I turn off? 22. Thank you. 22. For the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleets of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the fleets of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Oh, and there's a little note, or baboons. I'm pretty sure he had his own zoo at this point. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought him presents, which were articles of gold and silver, garments, myrrh, spices, horses, mules, and such year by year. So Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the, I'm not going to pronounce that. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kue, and the king's traders received them from Kue at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, again, worthless to Solomon, and a horse for 150. And so through the king's traders, they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. Solomon, so wealthy and so good at making trade deals, he buys horses and chariots for nothing to him and just gives them as peace offerings. That is insane. Again, it's just showing how much wealth Solomon had even as he was starting to walk away from God. When we get into his decline, we are going to be talking a lot about how Solomon had a ton of wives and a ton of concubines, 1,000 women. And instead of converting them, he gets converted instead. So he starts putting their idols in high places and puts them in the temple, which is so dumb. And he starts worshiping them as well. Why would he do that? I don't know. Exactly. There's not many commands he had to follow, but one of them was don't follow other gods. And guess what? That ruins everything. We're going to find a dude named Jeroboam who becomes the first king of the north. And by the north, we're talking, it's like 9 tribes. Benjamin and Judah are the only 2 tribes that actually stay with the Davidic line. Everyone else becomes its own separate kingdom. We see that kingdom eventually fall to the Assyrians, and then everyone falls to the Babylonians. But this is the start of, hey, we're going to start kind of not liking each other anymore, even though we're quite literally the same family. No, I'm not going to mention that because that's going to be next week, and I don't want to spoil that. Going to chapter 11, starting at verse 9. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. Hey, guess what? He starts worshiping a lot. But he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my commandment and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son, for the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. That's going to be the tribe of Benjamin. And the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal house in Edom. For when David was in Edom, and Joab the commander of the army went up to bury the slain, he struck down every male in Edom. For Joab and all Israel remained there 6 months, until he had cut off every male in Edom. But Hadad fled to Egypt together with certain Edomites of his father's servants. Hadad had still been a little child. They set out from Midian and came to Paran, and took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him an allowance of food and gave him land. And Hadad found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave in marriage the sister of his own wife, the sister of Tephanes the queen. The sister of Tephanes bore him Genubath, his son, whom Tephanes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in the Pharaoh's house with the sons of Pharaoh. So he's very much in Pharaoh's good graces, to the point of, your kid is with mine, and I have given you my sister-in-law in marriage. You are my family. And this is, I already read that. 21. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Let me depart, that I may go to my own country." But Pharaoh said to him, "What have you lacked with me, that you are now seeking in your own country?" And he only said to him, "Let me depart." God had risen up an adversary to him against Solomon, Rezin, the son of Elidah, who had fled from his master, which was king of And they gathered men about him and became a leader of a marauding band after killing David. So after David's dead, that's when this group comes up and starts just ruining Solomon's years. And they went to Damascus and lived there and made him king in Damascus. He was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon, doing harm as Hadad did. And he loathed Israel and reigned over Syria. Now this is going to be the first king that we will find of the north, starting in verse 26. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, the ephemerite of Zeradah, the servant of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also lifted up his hand against the king. And this was the reason why he lifted up his hand against the king. Solomon built the Milo and closed up the breach of the city of David his father. The man Jeroboam was very able, and when Solomon saw that the young man was industrious, he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. And that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahiah, the Sholite, found him on the road. Now Ahiah had dressed himself in a new garment, and the two were there alone in the open country. So Ahiah laid hold of the new garment and tore it up into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10, for thus say the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon and give you 10 tribes. But he shall have one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. Because they have forsaken me and worshipped a bunch of other gods that I'm not going to try and butcher. And they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and keeping my statutes and my rules, as David his father did." Because remember, David was a man after God's heart, to the point where when someone had asked him, "Do you want the throne or do you want God?" David said, "Give me God," which is why God kept him in power. Verse 34. "Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him a ruler of the days of his life, all the days of his life, for the sake of David my servant, who I chose, who kept my commandments and statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand and will give it to you, 10 tribes. Yet to his son I will give one tribe, that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where, I have chosen to put my name. And I will take you, and you shall reign over all that your soul desires, and you shall be king over Jerusalem. And if you will listen to all that I command you, and will walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes, by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will there be with you, and will build you a sure house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. And I will afflict the offspring of David because of this, but not forever. Because remember, out of the line of David comes Jesus. Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt to Shishak. Sure. We're doing a shake weight. Because of Shakeweight, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did are kept in a book called the Book of the Acts of Solomon. No idea what that is. The leading theory on that is that the Book of the Acts of Solomon, try saying that 5 times fast, is what was the basis of chapters 1 through 11. That was used to write all this. We don't know. It's one of those books in the Bible that we just don't have, which also makes a lot of sense because that book would be like 3,000 years old, and it's really hard to find a book from 3,000 years ago. There's a lot that he did, and a lot of it was not great. He ruled for 40 years, and then his son Rehoboam took the reigning position over all of Israel. And that brings Solomon's reign to an end. What do you think?
For being so wise, he's so messed up.
Oh, yeah. If you thought David was messy, Solomon got way worse. He literally had everything handed to him on a golden platter. And then...
What does that tell us about men?
Well, but the Queen of Sheba was very.
Yeah. No one in this story is good.
No.
Because I think this also helps prove have one spouse, not 1,000.
100 wives, 300 concubines. How do you even know their names?
Yeah. The wives alone, he would have to have a meal with 2 of them at a time to just hit all of them, and that'd be 1 a day. And then you add in the 300 concubines, that's breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I never see them again for a year.
I think this whole book points out that if you take your eye off of God and you think that you can handle it, you're wrong. There's never going to be a time, even though we think we're in control, we think we've got it made, we think we know what we're doing, we really don't.
I agree. This whole book says that.
And as humans, we tend to fall into that trap. I mean, we can look at Solomon and say, what an idiot.
Yeah.
But we have pretty much everything. And we tend to take our eye off the ball. We worry about the air conditioning, we worry about we worry about all that stuff. We take our eye off the ball, and it's so easy to do. The devil doesn't give us a break.
Yeah.
He prowls, the roaring lion, looking to who he can devour. If we are not in this all the time, we're cutting ourselves short.
Yeah.
I think he just did it on a grand scale.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that Solomon just one day turned. This is very clearly a long process over his 40 years that he eventually turned from God. And I think that's a lot to say, that it's very easy to turn your eye from God even if you don't realize it. Like, you know what, this Sunday I'm not going to go to church. I'll go next week. You know what, I've been going to church for a year. I can afford to take a month off. And then a month turns into 2 months, and then turns into half a year, and then all of a sudden you just fell out of the practice. You go during Christmas and Easter if you have time. And it's easy to see just how gradual the change can be. And I think that's to me, that's one of the things that always sticks out about Solomon is he didn't just go, you know what, I'm done with you, God. No, he was following the statutes. He offered up sacrifices 3 times a year. And knowing the wealth he had, he gave a lot of sheep and a lot of cattle. But being a CEO, Christmas and Easter only, doesn't do anything for your faith other than keep up appearances for the membership book. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to focus on is doing the acts and actually believing the words are 2 different things. Eventually somehow the 2nd commandment's going to show up and I'm going to preach on it. And one of my big things with that is it's not saying, oh my God, or other stuff like that. It's saying you're a Christian and then doing unchristian things. That, to me, is breaking the second commandment. Another way that I heard is God says you need to do this. Like, God says you need to go clean up your room. God doesn't say clean up your room. You're taking the Lord's name in vain that way, too. It's when you're invoking God when you're not supposed to. And I feel like that's what happens with a lot of Solomon. He goes, I am God's chosen. Let me go sleep with my 300 concubines. That's not following God's statutes. That's not following his rules. He wasn't loving his neighbor, and he wasn't loving God. I can harp on that all day. I'm going to stop right there. What are some other thoughts you got? Steve?
What isn't always the case, but when you look at David's life from the earliest stories, he struggled the whole time. He had it tough.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he had to go fight the giant, you know, and he was being chased by, you know, many people that were trying to kill him, even his own son. And so sometimes when you struggle like that, you become very strong. And like you said, Solomon had everything. It was handed on a platter to him. We know in history that at the time Egypt was pretty weak, and then, you know, among the Mesopotamian kingdoms were weak, and Solomon just controlled that trade route. He was, that wealth just poured in because there was nobody to stand against him. And I think when you have it easy like that, you know, at the beginning, he had the wisdom and just took it for granted maybe, and it just fell off him.
Yeah, fully agree. A life of ease turns into a life of complacency. And a life of complacency is easy to turn into a life of sin. Any other comments? I had a lot of fun doing all this research on Solomon. I learned new things. I didn't even know amalgam wood was a thing. And I got to tell you, we don't know what it is. That was a nice 15-minute rabbit hole that turned into nothing for me. Just some reminders about Solomon. Steve had pointed out great, but Solomon had everything given to him and had it all done the right way. He had the trade alliances. He had protection from everywhere. When you don't have to worry about things coming from the west, you have to turn to the east, the north, and the south. And when you marry the south's daughter, well, then you never have to worry about the south. And the north and the west, well, the north, he had Hiram of Tyre, which meant the north was covered because the north loved his dad, so they kept that up. So all he had to worry about was the east, and hey, the east is a giant desert, so you don't really have to worry about the east. Solomon had it amazingly. And then God gave him all that wealth, and gave him the wisdom, and gave him all that power, which I know for a fact, were I given all that, I would have probably done the same thing as Solomon, if not quicker. I will fully admit that. Because given all that free reign, you can do whatever. You are literally the most powerful person in history at this point. I would have fallen probably a lot harder and a lot quicker. So we can say that, yeah, Solomon's an idiot. But yeah, no, I'd be the idiot too, and I'd probably be the idiot worse. It's fun to remember the humility that God always gives us. Next week, we are going to be focusing on 1 Kings 12 and 13. This is going to be when the two kingdoms split and the procession of... No, not yet. This is just going to be focusing on the split that happens and people trying to keep power and horribly failing. So that's going to be 1 Kings 12 and 13. We're covering so many chapters.
At the beginning of Kings, well, not beginning of Kings, but when Solomon is introduced,
Mm-hmm.
it talks about him asking God for wisdom rather than riches.
Mm-hmm.
God says, then, yes, I'll give you wisdom. None before you, nor none after you will have such wisdom. So, Solomon acted foolishly. Okay, that's true. But he was still, I guess, according to this, the wisest man that ever lived.
Yeah.
Is it true? So is Solomon credited? Is he credited with the with Ecclesiastes, with the writing of Ecclesiastes? Or not?
I know he did a lot of Proverbs.
He did a lot of Proverbs, yeah.
I don't remember if he did Ecclesiastes. I don't remember if he did Ecclesiastes. I would not doubt that some of his sayings did creep into it, but I'll have to do a deep dive on that one for you. Let me make a note so I don't forget.
That we don't, I guess, but it says just the Ecclesiastes. It talks about the preacher, whether that's Solomon or I don't know.
Yeah, and the problem that we get into after Kings is that so many of these books have such varied, disputed authorship that even what the LCMS and we as the Christian church believe, what archaeologists believe, are two different things. Because like the book of Isaiah, for example, I have seen that it was written by Isaiah, which is what we believe. It was written by Isaiah's student. It was written by 3 different Isaiahs. It wasn't even written by an Isaiah at all, and it was written during the exile, which that's already 4 different authors.
Well, yeah, I know there's the early part of the book, right?
Yeah.
It's in the, I don't know, one section of time,
Yeah.
a decade or whatever, and then the latter part is many years later, right?
Yeah, because Isaiah is broken up into 3 sections. You have contemporary, near future, and then the eschaton. Because a lot of the stuff that's mentioned in, I believe it is 55 to 66, it all talks about what it will be like. And you can very much tell that this is Christianity fully realized and with Christ there, which is not really relevant to anyone that he goes, hey, your kingdom's about to fall in 30 years. It doesn't make a lot of sense how you're going to be living in peace with your enemies because the Messiah is here. And then the near future is best described as post-exile. This is your whole life after you come back. This is what it's going to be like. Which, okay, what good does that do? I know I'm going to be 90 by that time. Knowing my luck, I'm going to be dead. What's the point? Yeah. So the authorship of Isaiah is disputed because of that there are 3 different time periods it talks to. And then you get into Kings, Chronicles, Samuel. One thought is that they are all written during the exile, because you have 70 years of all the smart people being stuck together in the same house. Well, we've got time, let's write it. Because the oral tradition was strong. I mean, Moses didn't live through Genesis. He didn't live through it at all. Yet he's writing all the stuff of Genesis, which is 200 years pre-Israel coming to Egypt. Yet he's able to write it all. And then we know that the end of Deuteronomy is clearly not written by Moses because it talks about his death. But the Hebrew is changed, and we can tell that it's clearly written by someone else. So the authorship of the Old Testament, especially these big books of history, are really hard to get a crackdown on when you're trying to go through this authorship-wise and scholarly. And like, okay, what does this mean? When does this happen? Because I can't tell you when, and they were slaves to this day means. Okay, what are the instruments Yeah, what are the instruments of Solomon? Where are they? We know that the temple was ransacked and dismantled. So are those instruments still a thing? Were they broken? Like, there's these details that we don't have. And to quote my Sunday school teacher, the Bible tells us everything we need for salvation, not everything we want to know. I want to know about angels.
Pastor, did Solomon have a mentor?
I don't believe so, especially because it's God who gave him the wisdom. And I have to trust the good book on this one because it tells me what I need for salvation, not what I want to know. Yeah. Which we see that God giving things is all-encompassing. The thing I always like to point out is Elijah. When he's out in the wilderness after all of his prophet friends are killed or martyred, he goes up and goes to God, I don't want to live. And then, God says, sleep, drink water, here's some food. And he goes, and here's some friends for you as well. So I don't think that Solomon had a mentor because God gave him the wisdom. Anything else?
In Matthew chapter 9, and if you explain this, I apologize.
No worries.
I missed something. Why was Hiram disappointed in the 20 cities?
They were worthless.
Pardon?
They were worthless cities.
Oh, okay.
I had described it as basically giving ghost towns that had all the resources dried up. And Solomon gave him 20, which I would be very disappointed with that too.
Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? Awesome. Then I will end us in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to have come here and worship and to study your word. We ask that the lessons that we have gathered from this, whether clearly told to us or not, are used to guide our lives for the next week. We ask that you answer all the prayers that people have and that are written on their hearts. Amen.